The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Kepler Station, and Lisa Morgan pressed her face against the small window to catch her first glimpse of the massive orbital platform that would be her home for the next year. The station stretched out like a giant wheel spinning slowly against the backdrop of stars, and she could see dozens of other ships from different worlds attached to various docking ports. Some of the vessels looked organic and alive, while others appeared to be made of crystalline materials that caught and reflected the light from the nearby sun. Lisa had seen pictures of alien spacecraft before, but nothing prepared her for the reality of seeing them up close and knowing that soon she would be training alongside beings from those distant worlds. The other human cadets in the transport were quiet now after hours of nervous chatter during the journey from Earth. Lisa counted 23 humans in total, including herself, and she recognized a few faces from the preliminary training camp in Nevada, where they had spent 3 months preparing for this moment. The man sitting across from her was Danny Cooper, and she remembered him from the endurance runs where he had pushed himself harder than anyone else despite the desert heat. He had a strong build and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors, and when he caught her looking at him, he gave her a quick nod and a tight smile that did not quite reach his eyes. 2 rows behind Danny sat Kate Bishop, and she was staring at her hands with an intensity that made Lisa wonder what the quiet woman was thinking about. Kate rarely spoke during training, but Lisa had watched her during the combat drills and noticed how she moved with a fluid grace that reminded Lisa of a predator stalking through tall grass. The instructors back on Earth had told them that Kate grew up in Alaska, hunting caribou and bears with her father, and that she could track an animal across miles of frozen tundra without losing the trail. Lisa hoped that kind of skill would translate to whatever challenges awaited them on Kepler Station. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull, and the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom telling them to gather their gear and prepare for disembarkation. Lisa grabbed her duffel bag and joined the line of cadets shuffling toward the airlock. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she took slow, deep breaths to calm herself. This was what she had trained for and dreamed about since the day humanity joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago. She had been only 8 years old when the alien ships appeared in Earth's skies, and she still remembered standing in her backyard with her parents watching the news coverage of first contact. The aliens had been peaceful and curious about humanity, and they offered Earth a place in their ancient alliance of spacefaring civilizations. But joining the Galactic Council meant more than just peaceful cooperation and trade agreements. It meant contributing to the collective defense of all member worlds, and that meant humans needed to learn how to fight alongside soldiers from species that had been waging war among the stars for thousands of years. The Galactic Defense Initiative was established to train military forces from all allied species, and Kepler Station was the largest and most prestigious academy in known space. Getting selected for training here was an honor, but Lisa knew it. Also meant facing prejudice from species that viewed humanity as primitive newcomers who had barely learned to walk among the stars. The airlock cycled open, and Lisa stepped through into a corridor that was easily 3 times the height of a normal human hallway. The walls were made of some smooth material that seemed to shift colors as she walked past, and the lighting came from no visible source but illuminated everything with a soft white glow. The air smelled different here, and it took Lisa a moment to identify the scents as a mixture of ozone and something vaguely floral that made her nostrils tingle. Other cadets were already moving through the corridors, and Lisa got her first close look at the alien species she would be training with. A group of towering reptilian beings walked past, and they had to be at least 7 feet tall, with scales that ranged from deep green to rust red. Their eyes were golden with vertical slits for pupils, and when one of them glanced down at the human, cadets Lisa saw something like contempt flicker across its face. These were the Vricks, and the files back on Earth had described them as one of the oldest warrior races in the galaxy, with a military tradition spanning 5,000 years. They moved with a ponderous grace, and Lisa could see the way their muscles rippled beneath their scales, suggesting strength that far exceeded human capability. Further down the corridor, Lisa spotted a group of 4-armed beings with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The Keltheran were known for their precision and discipline, and the files had mentioned that they could manipulate 4 weapons simultaneously with perfect coordination. They wore uniforms that looked more like ceremonial robes, and they moved in perfect synchronization with each other, as if they shared a single mind. Then there were the Zorath, and Lisa had to suppress a shiver when she saw them. They looked like giant praying mantises standing upright on two legs with four other limbs that could serve as either arms or legs, depending on the situation. Their heads were triangular with compound eyes that reflected light in strange patterns, and their bodies were covered in a chitinous exoskeleton that clicked and scraped as they moved. The file said that Zorath could process information 3 times faster than humans, and their reflexes were so quick that they could snatch objects out of the air that other species could barely see. A booming voice echoed through the corridor, and all the cadets stopped moving. A massive Vrix wearing an instructor's uniform emerged from a side passage, and he was even larger than the other Vrix Lisa had seen, easily reaching 8 feet in height. His scales were a deep bronze color marked with white scars that spoke of countless battles, and his eyes swept over the assembled cadets with an expression that might have been disgust. This was Commander Thrax, and his reputation had preceded him. He was known as one of the toughest instructors in the Galactic Defense Initiative, and the files mentioned that he had a particular disdain for species he considered weak or unworthy. The commander's translator device flickered to life, and his words came out in perfect English, though the mechanical voice lacked the emotional weight of his actual speech. Welcome to Kepler Station, where you will learn what it means to be a soldier in the Galactic Defense Initiative. Most of you come from species with proud military traditions spanning millennia. You have earned your place here through skill and dedication. Then there are the humans. Commander Thrax's gaze fixed on the small cluster of human cadets, and Lisa felt the weight of his attention like a physical pressure. The other alien cadets turned to look at the humans, and Lisa could see curiosity mixed with amusement on many of their faces. Humanity has been part of the Galactic Council for only 15 years. Your species has no spacefaring military tradition. You have no natural advantages in combat. You are weaker than the Vrix and slower than the Zorath and less coordinated than the Keltheran. I expect most of you to wash out within the first month. Those who remain will learn that your place in the galactic hierarchy is at the bottom. That is simply the reality of your evolutionary limitations. The commander's words hung in the air, and Lisa felt Danny tense beside her. She could see Kate's jaw clench, and several other human cadets looked down at their feet, unable to meet the gazes of the alien soldiers around them. Lisa kept her eyes on Commander Thrax and refused to look away even when his golden stare focused on her specifically. She had not come all this way to be intimidated by words, no matter who spoke them. You will be assigned to your barracks, and your training begins tomorrow at dawn. Dismissed. The crowd of cadets began to disperse, and Lisa followed the flow toward the human barracks. She could hear whispered conversations in languages she did not understand, but the tone was clear enough. The aliens were laughing at them. The first week of training nearly broke half the human cadets, and Lisa watched 3 of them pack their bags and request transfer back to Earth after failing the basic combat simulations. The training was designed for species with natural advantages, and the humans struggled to keep up with opponents who were simply built better for war. During hand-to-hand combat drills, the Vrix cadets would barely need to exert themselves to overpower their human opponents, and their armor-plated skin made them nearly immune to the strikes that humans could deliver. Lisa found herself thrown across the training mat more times than she could count, and each impact left new bruises that ached through the night. The Keltheran presented a different challenge entirely, and their forearms meant they could attack and defend simultaneously from multiple angles, making it nearly impossible for humans to find an opening. Lisa watched Danny try to grapple with a Keltheran cadet during a sparring session, and the alien simply used 2 arms to hold Danny in place, while the other 2 delivered precise strikes to pressure points that left him gasping on the floor. The Keltheran moved with an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical, and they never wasted a single motion or made unnecessary movements. The Zorath were perhaps the most frustrating opponents because their enhanced processing speed meant they could see human attacks coming before they fully developed. Lisa would throw a punch and the Zorath would have already moved out of the way before her fist traveled halfway to its target. Their compound eyes tracked multiple threats at once, and their chitinous armor made them difficult to damage even when a human managed to land a hit. Kate was the only human who occasionally scored points against the Zorath by using deceptive movements that looked like one attack, but turned into another at the last second. Despite the constant defeats, Lisa noticed something the alien cadets did not seem to understand, and that was the human capacity for adaptation. Every time she faced a Vrix opponent, she learned something new about how they moved and where their balance points were located. The Vrix relied heavily on their strength, and they tended to use the same powerful strikes over and over, because those strikes worked against most opponents. Lisa began keeping a mental notebook of patterns and weaknesses, and she spent her evenings in the barracks discussing observations with Danny and Kate. The alien cadets noticed the humans studying them, and this seemed to amuse rather than concern them. 3 Vrix cadets in particular made it their mission to humiliate the humans at every opportunity, and they quickly became the worst tormentors in the entire training company. The largest of the 3 was named Drac, and he stood nearly 8 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. His voice boomed across the training hall whenever he spotted a human struggling with an exercise, and he would call out mocking commentary that made the other aliens laugh. Drac's 2 constant companions were Vess and Kor, and they followed their leader like shadows, always ready to join in whenever he decided to make an example of a human cadet. Drac seemed to particularly enjoy strength competitions, and he would challenge humans to tests that were impossible for them to win. He would grab a human cadet's hand and squeeze until they cried out in pain, and then laugh about how fragile human bones were compared to Vrix scales. During weapons training, he would deliberately strike harder than necessary when sparring with humans, and Commander Thrax would watch these incidents without intervening, as if he considered them part of the natural order establishing itself. The harassment escalated during the 3rd week, when the training moved to zero-gravity combat drills in one of the station's large centrifuge chambers. The cadets wore pressure suits and used magnetic boots to anchor themselves to the walls and floor while practicing combat maneuvers in an environment where traditional fighting techniques did not work. Lisa found zero-gravity combat disorienting at first, but she quickly adapted by thinking of the chamber as having 6 different floors instead of just 1. Danny had more trouble adjusting, and during one drill he found himself floating helplessly in the center of the chamber, unable to reach any surface to push off from. Drax saw Danny's predicament and used his magnetic boots to launch himself toward the helpless human. The Vrix slammed into Danny with his full body weight and sent him spinning toward the far wall. Danny's helmet struck the metal surface with a crack that echoed through the chamber, and when he pulled himself upright, Lisa could see a spiderweb of fractures spreading across his visor. The impact had been hard enough to crack the reinforced material, and if the helmet had failed completely, Danny would have been exposed to the vacuum. Commander Thrax called an end to the drill and ordered Danny to the medical bay, but he said nothing to Drac about the excessive force. The other Vrix cadets congratulated Drac on his technique, and Vess and Kor made jokes about how humans were too weak for real combat training. Kate helped Danny out of the chamber, and Lisa watched them go while feeling a cold anger building in her chest. She had been willing to accept difficult training and tough instructors, but this was different, and this was deliberate cruelty designed to drive humans out of the program. That evening, Lisa stayed late in one of the smaller training rooms running combat simulations on the holographic projector. The system could generate virtual opponents based on real combat data from various species, and Lisa spent hours fighting digital versions of Vrix warriors. She lost every simulation at first, but she began to notice patterns in how the Vrix moved and fought. They were incredibly strong, but their massive builds made them less flexible than humans, and their scales provided armor, but also limited their range of motion in certain directions. The Vrix relied on forward pressure and overwhelming force, but they had trouble adjusting when an opponent moved in unexpected ways. Lisa ran the simulation again, and this time, instead of trying to match the Vrix's strength, she focused on mobility and timing. She stayed close to the virtual opponent, moving inside its reach, where the long, powerful strikes could not build momentum. When the Vrix tried to grab her, she was already moving to a new position, and when it overextended on an attack, she targeted the joints where even armored scales had to flex and bend. The simulation still ended with her defeat, but this time she lasted almost a full minute instead of just seconds. Kate found Lisa in the training room well past midnight, and she stood in the doorway watching the simulation for a few moments before speaking. "Danny's going to be okay, but the doctors said another inch to the left, and that helmet crack would have reached the seal. He could have died out there." Lisa paused the simulation and turned to face Kate. Her muscles ached and sweat soaked through her training uniform, but she felt more focused than she had since arriving at Kepler Station. I know, and Thrax isn't going to do anything about it, because he thinks we deserve this treatment. Kate walked over to the holographic controls and studied the Vurix combat data displayed on the screen. You're looking for weaknesses, and I've been doing the same thing. The Zorath have a blind spot directly behind their heads where they're compound. Eyes can't see, and the Keltheran favor their upper arms over their lower ones. Every species has vulnerabilities, but the question is whether we're fast enough or strong enough to exploit them. Lisa reset the simulation, and this time selected a scenario with multiple opponents. We don't have to be stronger or faster than them, but we have to be smarter. Humans didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being the biggest or toughest predators, and we survived by being adaptable and finding creative solutions to impossible problems. The two women trained together until the station's artificial dawn cycle began, and by then Lisa had developed several new techniques for fighting opponents with superior physical attributes. The key was using their own strength and momentum against them, and never trying to win a direct confrontation where human limitations would guarantee defeat. Kate contributed her own observations about alien anatomy, and together, they identified vulnerable points on each species that most instructors probably did not even know existed. When they finally returned to the barracks, Danny was awake despite the late hour, and his face still showed bruises from the helmet impact. Several other human cadets were awake as well, and they gathered around as Lisa and Kate described what they had discovered in their training session. The mood in the room shifted from defeated resignation to something harder and more determined. The humans had been taking abuse for weeks and absorbing lesson after painful lesson, but now they were ready to start pushing back. The next day during combat drills, Lisa noticed Drac watching her with more attention than usual, and the massive Vrik seemed to sense that something had changed in the way she moved and fought. When they were paired for a sparring match, Lisa did not try to overpower him, but instead focused on staying mobile and making him work harder than he expected. She still lost the match, but Drac was breathing heavily afterward, and he did not make his usual mocking comments. Vess and Kor watched from the sidelines, and Lisa could see confusion on their reptilian faces, as if they could not quite understand why the human had suddenly become more difficult to defeat. Commander Thrax observed everything from his elevated platform, and his golden eyes tracked Lisa's movements with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The instructor said nothing, but Lisa had the distinct impression that he was reassessing his initial judgment about human capabilities. The question was whether that reassessment would come soon enough, or whether the harassment would escalate further before someone finally put a stop to it. 2 months into training, and the atmosphere at Kepler Station had shifted in subtle ways that most of the alien cadets did not fully recognize, but the humans felt keenly. The daily humiliations continued and the mockery never stopped completely, but there was a new edge to the interactions now. The human cadets no longer dropped their eyes when Vrix warriors passed them in the corridors, and during combat drills they pushed back harder than before even when facing impossible odds. Danny had recovered from his helmet injury and returned to training with a grim determination that made even some of the Keltheran cadets give him respectful nods. Lisa continued her late-night training sessions, and Kate joined her most evenings to practice the techniques they had developed for fighting larger and stronger opponents. They discovered that human flexibility was actually an advantage, because they could contort their bodies in ways that most alien species found impossible. The Vrix in particular had trouble tracking opponents who dropped low or moved in unexpected patterns because their combat training emphasized standing their ground and using superior strength. Lisa began to see combat not as a test of power but as a puzzle where the solution involved using an opponent's expectations and natural advantages against them. The breaking point came during a live combat exercise in the main training arena, and the cadets were using practice weapons set to deliver painful but non-lethal stun charges. When they made contact, the exercise was designed to simulate battlefield conditions with multiple combatants fighting simultaneously across a large space filled with obstacles and cover points. Lisa found herself paired with a human cadet named Chris Hayes against 2 Keltheran opponents, and the match was going poorly because the Keltheran could coordinate their arms to create defensive patterns that were nearly impossible to penetrate. Chris was a good fighter, but he lacked experience against alien opponents, and when he tried to press an attack, one of the Keltheran caught him with two arms and held him in place while preparing a strike with the other two. Lisa moved to help, but before she could reach them, the exercise timer signaled the end of the match. The Keltheran were supposed to release Chris immediately according to the rules, but they held him for an extra moment to deliver a final strike to his ribs that sent him stumbling backward. The crowd of watching cadets murmured, but no one moved to help, and Chris got to his feet holding his side and clearly in pain but trying not to show it. The Keltheran walked away without acknowledging what they had done, and Lisa helped Chris to the edge of the arena where he could catch his breath. She was about to suggest they visit the medical bay when she heard Drax's booming voice from across the arena. The Vrix warrior was in the middle of his own match against Chris, and his opponent was another human cadet who had been struggling throughout the entire training program. The match should have been over quickly, but Drax was deliberately prolonging it and using just enough force to keep his opponent off balance without actually finishing the fight. The other cadets were watching, and some were laughing at the spectacle of the helpless human trying to mount any kind of defense against the massive Vrix. Commander Thrax watched from his platform without intervening, and his expression was unreadable as always. The match timer showed 30 seconds remaining when Drax finally seemed to tire of his game. He delivered a powerful strike that sent the human cadet sprawling. And then, as his opponent tried to rise, Drax kicked him in the shoulder with enough force that everyone in the arena heard something pop. The human cried out and clutched his arm, and it was clear that his shoulder had been dislocated or possibly broken. The arena fell silent, and even the alien cadets who had been laughing moments before looked uncomfortable. Drax stood over his fallen opponent with his weapon still raised, and Vess and Kor moved to flank him as if expecting some kind of confrontation. The injured human was helped off the arena floor by two other humans, and Lisa watched him go while feeling that cold anger from weeks ago return even stronger than before. She walked onto the arena floor before she fully realized what she was doing, and her voice carried across the space with a clarity that surprised even herself. Drax, you want a real match instead of beating up on people who can't fight back? The Vrix warrior turned to face her, and his golden eyes narrowed. The massive reptilian took a step forward, and his scales caught the arena lights in a way that made him look even more imposing. You think you can do better, little human, and you barely last 30 seconds against any Vrix in this facility. Lisa stopped in the center of the arena and kept her voice level and calm. Then it should be easy for you to prove it, but make it interesting. Fight me with your friends there, and all three of you against one human. That should be enough of an advantage even for you. The arena erupted in noise, and cadets from every species started talking at once. Some were laughing at what they saw as human arrogance, while others seemed genuinely shocked that anyone would challenge three Vrix warriors simultaneously. Danny pushed through the crowd and grabbed Lisa's arm, trying to pull her back. What are you doing? And this is insane, and they'll put you in the hospital. Lisa pulled her arm free gently but firmly. Someone has to show them we're not just punching bags, and I'm tired of watching them hurt people who can't defend themselves. Kate appeared on Lisa's other side, and her quiet voice somehow cut through the noise. If you're going to do this, then do it right, and don't give them any excuses when you win. Drax conferred briefly with Vess and Kor, and then all three Vrix warriors moved onto the arena floor. The crowd pressed against the barriers, eager to see what would happen next, and Lisa could see cadets placing bets on how long she would last. The general consensus seemed to be somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds before the three Vrix would overwhelm her completely. Commander. Thrax descended from his platform, and his massive form moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through water. He reached the arena floor and looked at Lisa with an expression that might have been curiosity or possibly concern, though it was hard to read Vrix emotions. You understand what you are proposing, and three trained Vrix warriors against a single human with no backup and no safety protocols. Beyond the stun settings on the weapons, Lisa met his golden gaze without flinching. I understand, sir, and I'm ready. The commander studied her for a long moment and then nodded slowly. Very well. And this will be a demonstration bout to show the consequences of overconfidence. He gestured to the three Vrix warriors. You will use standard combat protocols and non-lethal force only. He turned back to Lisa. You may withdraw at any time by leaving the arena floor, and no one will think less of you for recognizing impossible odds. Lisa said nothing and simply moved to her starting position in the center of the arena. She could feel every eye in the facility watching her, and the weight of representing not just herself, but every human who had been mocked and beaten down over the past 2 months. Danny and Kate stood at the barrier and both looked terrified, but neither tried to stop her again. Chris was back from the medical bay with his arm in a sling, and he watched with an intensity that made Lisa more determined not to let him down. Drac and his companions spread out to surround her, and they were taking their time and clearly not worried about facing a single human opponent. They activated their training weapons, and the tips glowed with the blue light that indicated active stun charges. Drac twirled his weapon casually and said something in his native language that made Vess and Cor laugh. The translator on Lisa's uniform rendered his words a moment later. "This will be over before it begins, and then perhaps the humans will learn their place." Lisa did not respond, and she simply adjusted her grip on her own weapon and settled into a loose, ready stance. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear and focused. She had spent weeks studying Vrick's combat patterns and learning their weaknesses and identifying the exact moments when their strength became a liability instead of an advantage. She knew that Drac would attack first because he always led with the same overhead strike that relied on his superior reach and power. She knew that Vess favored hooking attacks from the left side, and that Cor was the fastest of the three but also the most predictable in his movements. Commander Thrax raised his hand and the arena fell completely silent. All eyes were on the 4 figures in the center and 3 massive Vrix warriors surrounding a single human woman who barely came up to their chests. The commander's hand dropped and his voice boomed across the space. "Begin." What happened next would be discussed and analyzed and debated in training facilities across the entire Galactic Defense Initiative for years. To come, and military scholars would study the footage trying to understand exactly how a single human defeated 3 Vrix warriors in a span of time so short that most species would struggle to process what they were seeing. But in that moment, with the entire facility watching and her fellow humans holding their breath, Lisa Morgan simply did what humans had always done when facing impossible odds, and she adapted. Drac moved first exactly as Lisa knew he would, and the massive Vrix lunged forward with his signature overhead strike that had defeated dozens of opponents over his years of training. The weapon came down in a powerful arc, designed to use his full body weight and superior reach to overwhelm whatever defense his opponent might attempt. It was a move that worked against almost every species in the galaxy, because even if they blocked the strike, the sheer force behind it would drive them backward and off balance. But Lisa was not where Drac expected her to be when his weapon descended through empty air. She had already closed the distance and moved inside his guard before his strike was halfway complete. Human flexibility allowed her to drop low and slide under his extended arms in a way that Vrix physiology made impossible for them to anticipate or counter. Their combat training never prepared them for opponents who could compress their bodies and change elevation so rapidly, because most warrior species maintained upright postures even during aggressive maneuvers. Lisa's entire body was now inside the reach of Drac's long arms, and his weapon was still traveling downward, behind her, completely out of position to defend against what came next. Her sweep caught his lead leg at the exact moment when all his weight was committed forward, and his other leg was still lifting to complete his lunge. Human anatomy courses had taught Lisa that Vrix knees bent only in one direction, and their powerful leg muscles were designed for forward thrusts and lateral stability, but not for sudden sideways pressure at the joint itself. She did not try to match his strength because that would have been impossible, but instead, she struck the side of his knee with precise force at the point where his own momentum was already pulling him off balance. The result was inevitable physics, rather than a contest of power. Drac's leg buckled at an angle it was never meant to bend, and his massive body began to topple sideways. He roared in surprise and pain as his knee joint twisted, and his weapon flew from his hands as he tried to catch himself. The great Vrix warrior crashed to the arena floor with an impact that shook the ground and sent vibrations through the soles of Lisa's boots. His face showed pure shock because, in all his years of training, no opponent had ever put him on the ground. In the opening seconds of a match, Vess reacted, immediately coming in hard from Lisa's left with the hooking strike she had seen him practice 100 times during training exercises. The attack came fast and carried tremendous force behind it, because Vess was putting everything into the blow, trying to avenge his fallen companion and end this humiliating display. But Lisa had studied human history, and she knew that her species had spent thousands of years developing tactics for fighting multiple opponents simultaneously. The ancient masters who had created human martial arts understood that trying to block or stop a powerful attack often failed, but redirecting that force could turn an enemy's strength into their downfall. Lisa did not attempt to block the heavy weapon arcing toward her skull, and instead, she moved with the strike rather than against it. Her hands guided Vess's weapon arm across her body as she pivoted, and used his own momentum to pull him further off balance than his attack had already committed him. The Vrix stumbled forward, and his center of gravity shifted in ways his combat instincts had not prepared him for. Human fighters knew that balance was more important than strength, and that even the mightiest warrior became helpless once their feet left the ground or their weight moved beyond their ability to recover. Vess tried to compensate by planting his feet and using his powerful legs to stop his forward motion, but Lisa was already moving to her next target. Her elbow struck the nerve cluster at the side of Vess's thick neck, and Kate had discovered this weakness weeks ago while studying alien anatomy in the medical database. The Vrix had heavily armored scales across most of their bodies, but certain areas remained vulnerable by necessity, and the nervous system pathways that connected their brains to their bodies passed through relatively exposed positions near the base of their skulls. The strike would not have worked if Lisa had tried to deliver it with brute force, because Vrix scales could absorb tremendous impact. But nerve clusters did not respond to force, and instead reacted to precise pressure at exactly the right location. Lisa's elbow found the target with surgical accuracy, and Vess's entire nervous system overloaded for a critical moment. His eyes rolled back and his legs stopped supporting his weight, and he dropped to the arena floor as if someone had cut his strings. The massive warrior's body twitched and spasmed as his nerves tried to re-establish proper connections, and he would recover in a few seconds, but those seconds were all Lisa needed. Core was the fastest of the three Vrix, and his brain finally processed what was happening around him. Two of his companions were on the ground, and this was supposed to be an easy demonstration about showing human weakness. But instead, something had gone terribly wrong. Core activated his weapon to maximum stun setting and charged forward with all the speed his powerful legs could generate. He was done playing around, and he was done underestimating his opponent, and he was going to end this. Immediately, with overwhelming force, Lisa had already grabbed Vess's dropped weapon from the arena floor, and in one smooth motion she threw it not at Core's body but at his feet. The weapon tumbled through the air and struck the ground directly in the path of Core's charging feet. Human hunters had used thrown objects for millions of years, and they understood how prey animals reacted to sudden obstacles in their path. Core's warrior instincts made him dodge the unexpected projectile exactly as Lisa had predicted, because standing warriors never wanted anything interfering with their footwork and balance. The dodge put Core exactly where Lisa needed him to be, and his body was committed to the sideways movement with no way to adjust his trajectory mid-motion. She closed the remaining distance and delivered a strike to his solar plexus with every ounce of her body weight behind it. The blow itself would barely phase a Vrix under normal circumstances, because their dense muscle and scale armor could absorb impacts that would incapacitate most species. But Lisa was not trying to hurt Core through brute force, and she was using timing. Instead, the strike landed precisely as Core's foot touched down from his dodge, and his body was mechanically vulnerable at that exact instant. All of his weight was transferring through one leg, and his center of mass was still shifting from the dodge, and his breathing was interrupted at the moment of impact. The combination of factors created a perfect storm, where even a relatively weak strike could have devastating effects. Core's breath exploded from his lungs, and his body's automatic defensive response shut down his voluntary muscle control for a critical fraction of a second. Lisa swept his supporting leg before he could recover, and Core joined his two companions on the arena floor. She stepped back and raised her weapon to a ready position, prepared to continue if any of the three Vrix managed to get back up. Drac was clutching his damaged knee and breathing hard through his pain. Vess was still twitching as his nervous system slowly recovered from the overload. Core was gasping for air and trying to force his lungs to work properly again. The arena was completely silent, and hundreds of cadets from dozens of species stared at the impossible scene before them. Three of the best Vrix warriors in the training facility were on the ground, and a single human woman stood in the center of the arena, barely breathing hard. The entire sequence from start to finish had taken 3.7 seconds according to the arena's automated timer and most of the watching. Cadets had barely processed the opening moves before all three Vrix were already defeated. Commander Thrax stood at the edge of the arena, and his golden eyes were wide with something that might have been shock or possibly awe. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The translator on his chest flickered and sparked as if it too was struggling to find appropriate language for what had just occurred. The ancient Vrix warrior had trained soldiers for 40 years and fought in campaigns across a dozen star systems and studied combat techniques from 100 different worlds, but nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for what he had just witnessed. Danny and Kate stood at the barrier with identical expressions of amazement, and behind them the other human cadets were starting to cheer and shout. The sound built slowly at first and then grew into a roar that echoed through the entire facility. Some of the alien cadets remained silent and stunned, but others joined in the applause, recognizing skill and courage, even when it came from an unexpected source. Chris stood with his arm in a sling and tears ran down his face as he watched Lisa help Core to his feet, and then assist Vess and finally offer her hand to Drac, who stared at it for a long moment before accepting. The three Vrix warriors stood together and looked at the human who had defeated them so decisively. Their expressions showed confusion and respect and something else that might have been the beginning of understanding. They had thought they knew what combat meant and what strength looked like and where humans fit in the galactic hierarchy. In less than 4 seconds, a single human cadet had shattered all those assumptions and forced them to reconsider everything they believed about warfare and warriors and the nature of true power. Commander Thrax finally found his voice, and the translator rendered his words with unusual hesitation and uncertainty. The match is concluded, and Cadet Morgan has demonstrated that I may have been premature in my assessment of human capabilities. The medical staff cleared all 3 Vrix warriors for continued training after examining them thoroughly and determining that Drac's knee would heal with proper rest, while Vess and Core had suffered no permanent damage from their brief encounter with human combat techniques. The news spread through Kepler Station faster than light-speed communications, and by evening every cadet in the facility had seen footage of the match from multiple angles. The alien cadets gathered in small groups watching the recordings, over and over trying to understand how a human had moved so quickly and struck so precisely, and turned superior strength into a liability instead of an advantage. Lisa found herself surrounded by curious cadets from various species asking questions about human fighting styles and wanting to know if all humans could fight like that or if she was some kind of exceptional specimen. She tried to explain that any human could learn the techniques she had used given enough time and proper training, but many of the aliens seemed skeptical. They had spent their entire lives believing that physical advantages were what mattered in combat, and the idea that strategy and adaptability could overcome natural superiority was difficult for them to accept. Danny and Kate became minor celebrities among the human cadets, and several of them wanted to learn the observation techniques that had allowed the 2 of them to identify alien weaknesses. Kate organized informal training sessions in the evenings where she taught other humans how to study their opponents and look for patterns in movement and identify the moments when even the strongest warrior became vulnerable. Danny focused on physical conditioning and helped humans develop the flexibility and reflexes needed to fight opponents who were larger and faster than themselves. The atmosphere in the training facility changed in ways both subtle and profound. The alien cadets no longer made casual jokes about human weakness, and when they passed humans in the corridors there were respectful nods instead of dismissive glances. Some of the Keltheran cadets approached Danny to ask about human endurance training, and they had heard that humans could run for hours without stopping, and they wanted to understand how a species with seemingly average physical capabilities could sustain such prolonged exertion. Several Zorath cadets sought out Kate to discuss hunting strategies, and they were fascinated by her descriptions of tracking prey across vast distances using minimal clues. Drac and his 2 companions kept to themselves for several days after the match, and the 3 Vrix warriors seemed to be processing what had happened to them. Lisa saw them in the training hall working through drills with unusual intensity, and she noticed that they were practicing defensive techniques instead of their usual offensive routines. On the 5th day after the match, Drac approached her in the corridor, and his massive form blocked her path, but his posture was not threatening. The translator on his chest crackled to life, and his words came out stilted and formal. Cadet Morgan, I wish to speak with you about the techniques you used in our match, and I have reviewed the footage many times, but I do not understand how you predicted my movements so accurately. Lisa looked up at the towering Vrix warrior and saw genuine curiosity in his golden eyes instead of the contempt that had been there before. You use the same opening strike in almost every fight, and it works against most opponents because you're stronger than them, and your reach is longer. But once I saw the pattern, I knew exactly what you would do, and where you would be vulnerable. Drax's head tilted slightly in what might have been the Vrix equivalent of a nod. And Vess and Kor both fell to techniques I have never seen in any combat manual or training program across the entire Galactic Defense Initiative. And where did you learn such methods? Lisa considered how to explain thousands of years of human martial arts development to an alien who came from a culture where superior strength had always been enough. Humans are not the strongest species, and we're not the fastest or the toughest, but we've spent our entire evolutionary history fighting things that were bigger and more dangerous than us. We learned to use tactics and tools and teamwork to overcome advantages we didn't have naturally. The techniques I used against you were developed by humans who fought bears and tigers and other humans who were trying to kill them. The Vrix warrior was silent for a long moment, processing this information. On my world, the strongest warriors lead and the weak serve them, and that is the natural order established by our ancestors over thousands of years. But you have shown me that strength alone is not enough against an opponent who understands how to turn that strength into weakness. This is a difficult concept for me to accept. Lisa felt a surge of respect for Drac, because admitting that his worldview might be wrong took a different kind of courage than physical bravery. Every species has advantages and disadvantages, and the key is understanding both your own capabilities and your opponent's limitations. You're incredibly strong, and your scales provide natural armor, but those same advantages make you less flexible and more predictable. If you learn to vary your attacks and defend against unconventional tactics, you would be even more formidable than you already are. Drac made a rumbling sound that might have been laughter or possibly respect. Perhaps I have much to learn from the species I dismissed as weak, and I would be honored if you would train with me and show me these human techniques that defeated me so decisively. The two warriors began training together regularly, and their sessions attracted crowds of curious cadets from multiple species. Lisa taught Drac how to recognize and counter the tactics she had used against him, while he helped her understand Vrix's combat philosophy and the cultural traditions that shaped their approach to warfare. Vess and Kor joined the training sessions, and soon other alien cadets were asking to participate. The informal gatherings became an exchange of knowledge between species who had previously seen each other as separate and unequal. Commander, Thrax observed these developments with an expression that was difficult to read even for those who had learned to interpret Vrix's facial features. One evening, he summoned Lisa to his office, and she entered the commander's quarters with some trepidation, unsure whether she was about to be praised or punished. The office was sparse and functional, with weapons from various campaigns mounted on the walls and commendations from military actions spanning decades. The commander gestured for her to sit, and he remained standing because his massive frame made most furniture uncomfortable for extended periods. Cadet Morgan, I have been an instructor for longer than your species has had spaceflight, and I have trained warriors from 40 different worlds in the art of combat. I believed I understood what made a soldier effective and what determined victory in battle. Your performance in the arena has forced me to question assumptions I have held for my entire career. Lisa sat quietly and waited for the commander to continue. She had learned that Vrix preferred to speak without interruption when discussing important matters. Thrax paced slowly across the office, and his claws clicked against the metal floor. I told you on your first day that humans had no natural advantages and no military tradition, and no place in the galactic hierarchy, except at the bottom. I was wrong, and not merely incorrect in my assessment, but fundamentally mistaken in my understanding of what makes a warrior dangerous. Physical strength and natural weapons and superior reflexes are advantages, but they are not the only factors that matter in combat. The commander stopped pacing and turned to face Lisa directly. I have been reviewing historical records of human warfare, and what I have found disturbs me greatly. Your species has been fighting wars against each other for your entire recorded history, and you have developed thousands of different combat systems and tactical doctrines and strategic philosophies. You fight in environments that would kill most species, and you adapt to opponents who have every advantage over you, and you simply refuse to accept defeat even when logic says you should. Surrender. Lisa felt a mix of pride and discomfort at the commander's assessment, because human history was filled with both remarkable Achievements and terrible atrocities. We've had to learn how to survive because we didn't have other options, and when you're the weakest predator, you either get creative or you go extinct. Thrax made a sound that might have been agreement or possibly concern. The Galactic Council welcomed humanity as members 15 years ago, but I do not think anyone truly understood what they were inviting into the alliance. The other species see humans as harmless newcomers who need protection and guidance, but I have seen what you are capable of when challenged. You are persistence hunters who never stop pursuing a goal, and you are tool users who turn any object into a weapon. And you are social creatures who coordinate in ways that amplify individual capabilities exponentially. The commander moved to his desk and pulled up a holographic display showing combat statistics from the training facility. Since your arrival, human cadets have had the highest washout rate of any species, but those who remain are improving faster than any group I have ever trained. You learn from every defeat, and you share knowledge freely with each other, and you refuse to be limited by your natural disadvantages. In another year, the best human cadets will be competitive with elite warriors from species that have been fighting for millennia. Lisa absorbed this information and tried to understand what the commander was really saying. Are you concerned that humans will become a threat to the other species in the alliance? Thrax's golden eyes met hers with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. I am concerned that no one in the Galactic Council understands what humanity truly represents, and you are not conquerors or destroyers, but you are survivors who adapt to any challenge and overcome any obstacle. That makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous in an alliance built on stability and established hierarchies. But it also makes you valuable because the galaxy needs warriors who can think creatively and fight unconventionally and win battles that should be impossible. The commander deactivated the holographic display and his posture relaxed slightly. I summoned you here to tell you that I was wrong about your species, and I intend to revise my training methods to account for human capabilities. I also want to apologize for allowing the harassment you and your fellow cadets endured, because I believed it would either strengthen you or drive out those who were too weak to serve. I see now that I was testing you against the wrong standards. Lisa stood and faced the massive Vrix warrior. Thank you, sir, and that means more than you know. Days turned into weeks, and the training continued with renewed intensity. The human cadets no longer felt like outsiders struggling to keep up with superior beings, and instead, they were recognized as valuable members of the training company with unique skills and perspectives. Lisa found herself leading mixed-species training exercises, where humans worked alongside Vrix and Keltherin and Zorath to solve complex tactical problems that required combining the strengths of multiple species. One evening, Lisa stood in the observation deck looking out at the stars beyond Kepler Station, and she thought about how far humanity had come in just 15 years since first contact. Kate found her there and joined her at the viewport. The quiet woman from Alaska had become one of the top-ranked cadets in the entire facility, and several alien species had requested her as an instructor for their own military programs. We did it, and we proved that humans belong here. Lisa nodded slowly, but her expression remained thoughtful. We proved we can compete, and we showed that human techniques can be effective against superior opponents, but this is just the beginning. There are hundreds of species in the Galactic Council, and most of them still see us as the newcomers who got lucky. We have a long way to go before humanity is truly accepted as equals. Kate smiled, and it was a rare expression that transformed her normally serious face. Then I guess we'll just have to keep surprising them, and that's what humans do best anyway.